Hello and welcome to the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric, joined as always by my lovely co-host Jack, who is goated with the sauce. He definitely knows what that means.
As a young person, I clearly know exactly what goated with the sauce means. But, do tell for the audience that doesn't know.
Hold on, I'm Googling it.
Okay. Damn it. We're revealing our uncool secrets. Eric, how are you doing?
I am well. It's good. Goated with the sauce is good. It means that you're the best of all time, and also you got some swagger, is what Urban Dictionary is telling me. I am good. I have had a nice sunny week here in DC. I've gotten to make the best use out of it, I think. I finally got a board game night in with a friend here in town, and it was lovely. I found there's a board game themed bar called the Boardroom out in Arlington that they're also a brewery, and they have beers that are named after board game things. So there's a Checkmate Pils, that's a Czech style Pilsner. And now I'm fully forgetting what the rest of them are, but it's good.
You're a brewery guy.
I am. I used to manage a brewery.
That can be examined just by your beanie and beard situation going on right now, but you have the creds to back it up. So if you were to, if we did a list of games and you took those names and you were like, well, here's what I would brew trying to capture the essence of those games, do you think you could do that? How crunch worthy is that to have on a podcast, or would you not be able to just lightning fire it?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a few different things that I feel very confident in. Let's see. Harmonies could be a really floral saison. Definitely get some nice cut grass flavors in there. Dry hop it probably with probably some Citra. Citra would be nice there. But yeah, do saison or beer de garde style, just real weedy and a little bit funky with some hay in there.
What about what was it? Terroir?
The terroir?
I realize that's a wine thing, but
it still can be applied. I mean, that's that would be for the hops. The hops have different terroirs depending on where they're grown. I mean, but at this point, pretty much everything is grown in Yakima Valley, Washington, at least in the U.S.
See, I know about terroir from listening to Maynard James Keenan of Tool talk about wine, because he'd rather talk about winemaking than music making for the most part. But I'm completely lost with just about all the rest of it as a non-drinker. I've always kind of been on the periphery, but I love all these names, and I love that you went to a board game themed bar. Yeah. Was this your first time going there?
Yeah, this was my first time heading out there. A friend of mine told me about it before this and was like, "Oh, we should go sometime," and I kind of never got around to it just because it's a little bit weird to get to from where I am in DC, but the other place I was going would have been much farther to meet my friend at his place. So this was a nice middle ground that was, we can go, we can bring our board game, which was Molly House, which was really fun, which we will talk about in a bit. But that was the first time of me going there. I know that these places exist. There's another one called the exact same thing. It's also called the Boardroom. I don't think they're related. And that one's in...
Curse us dorks, everything is cardboard or meeple or, whatever. We're too invested in Cardboard Herald at this time. And I felt when I came up with that name 10 years ago that was yeah.
You felt really good?
You felt
and Harold maybe goated with the sauce on it?
Possibly. It was so saucy, and I felt like that was doing something unique. And maybe 10 years ago, it was a little bit less prevalent. I'm not going to claim to have the first cardboard blank by any means. And there are much more prominent and popular things that are associated with cardboard. But now I am kind of like, I don't know. I use TCbH for most of my stuff. I like the Cardboard Herald, but I almost exclusively abbreviate it at this point, and I don't care if people have no idea what TCbH is.
That's fine. They'll figure it out. They Google it. It comes up.
Or not.
Or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's
rebranding.
There's another bar that's the exact same name, but it is much. I don't. They don't have tables that I think would accommodate Molly House. It's more for like party games. Which is totally
that
fine,
was actually that was going to be my question, because when I think of going to a public meetup place, especially somewhere that is looking to, they want people to be dining and drinking and then maybe moving on so they can get more customers and everything. I don't typically think of longer, bigger games like Molly House, which is, that's a dense, chunky thing. That's the new whirligig joint.
It is.
Were other people playing similar weight games at the first bar that was in the discussion here?
No, but I think that's mainly because it was backgammon night. So most people were playing backgammon around us. It was that was an interesting turn of events where it was just like, oh, there were so many people playing backgammon around us.
Right.
One second. Ma'am, you can walk behind me. We'll just do a cut. We'll cut here.
Sorry.
You're okay.
I'm so sorry.
You're okay, my love. And now you can say hi to Jack.
I will.
Mm-hmm.
I wave hello.
Now I can say hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
I can't actually hear him, but
He says hello.
yes,
Yeah.
nice things. Good. I really like the background of Jack's screen. I can't see yours, but it looks very nice with the guitars and everything. Okay. All right. Enjoy.
So we were talking about
The board game place. Yeah. So before we dive into Molly House itself, why bring a game to a public meetup like that, especially if it's a friend that you probably would have over at your house, right? It is something that I've done, and I like different environments and everything. Mm-hmm. Was it like an occasion just to visit this place? Was it that Molly House felt like, this is something where we kind of need a special environment for? Because usually when I think of public meetups, you're rotating people and meeting strangers, or maybe people that you don't necessarily have the close relationship that you're inviting them over to your house all the time. Like, that's the real advantage of at least the brewery night that I go to on Mondays.
Yeah, well, for us, it was... First of all, the bar was like pretty much empty. It wasn't like a special board game night. It's a bar that they have board games to rent, but they also just have table space. So we parked ourselves off in the corner while they had like a third of the tables playing backgammon off on the other side of the restaurant, and then like sporadic board gamers dispersed pretty evenly throughout the rest. So it wasn't like I don't think, other than the backgammon people, they were like rotating who's playing what. It was all everybody just came, met up with their friends, and played the games there. And I think for us, the big thing was I didn't have the car available to me to drive out to where he is. And he had a friend staying with him that it was just like, oh, well, let's just go to this like public bar in DC as opposed to like going into town to this person who I don't really know that well, because we had met once, then played some games online, but that was like the first time interacting in person since I met him at PAX.
That's always a good call.
Yeah, it's usually good. Always meet in a public location for everything ever. If you're talking to somebody online.
You did meet at my doorstep, so I guess
I did
there's
meet you
that.
at the doorstep. My wife said that we were discussing at first her driving me out there so that she had the car, and she's like, this is going to be another time where I drop you off at some random person's house to play board games, isn't it? And I was like, yeah. I met them online. What do you want? Yeah.
All right. Well, let's not tease the people any further.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Molly House. Like, this is the new hotness. How did it go?
Hotness. So the people I was playing with and myself approached this game in a way that I feel like it was not the intentional way to approach it. So just to give like a very broad overview of the game for people who are either like just familiar with the name or maybe don't know anything else about it. In the game, you are playing as a gay man in Victorian England, trying to visit or get as much joy out of life as possible. And joy is represented by throwing these festivities, which are represented by a deck of cards, essentially. And in the deck of cards, there's like the normal 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there are special cards that are the jacks and queens that are called mollies. And then there's a constable who's trying to arrest you in the deck, and a rogue who is going to who will turn you in, like will basically snitch on the molly houses. And I think we all approached it initially as we need to get our own score up as much as possible, but the thing we need to avoid we cannot do is like ever have the threat of the molly houses shutting down. Because if you play cards in a certain way, you basically are putting evidence out there for the molly houses to be eventually shut down. And everybody at the table at first was like doing everything we could to avoid it. Like any evidence going on. We got through like 4 of the 5 rounds, and there was a total of like 5 pieces of evidence on the board. And the community's joy, which you all collectively have to work to raise up for anybody to get the chance to win, was not very high. And
this is because you guys were all so scared and covering up your evidence.
Exactly. Well, and then in the last round, we went like very hard the opposite direction. We're like, we're throwing parties. Every single action. Every action is throwing a party to get the community joy up. And then that ended up with a ton of evidence being thrown into the pile. And basically there's a breakpoint of once one of the molly houses reaches 7 pieces of evidence, it's been rated, and whoever has the most cubes or the most reputation in that that specific suit, because there are 4 molly houses on the board, they're all different suits. Whoever has the most reputation in that given suit gets a major indictment, which might mean that they, at the very end of the game, either lose victory points or they just are hung and they're done. They're dead entirely. And the other breakpoint is if a molly house that has been raided has another 7 pieces of evidence on it at the end of the round, everybody loses unless you have become an informant and started snitching on the houses. But you can only do that if a house has already been raided. So basically we got to a point where in the very last round, we were throwing caution to the wind. We threw so much evidence on the board that one molly house went from not rated at all to fully shut down. We had...
And for context, if people aren't aware, Molly houses were a real thing, and this is definitely like a historical,
It is.
well-researched game. It's born out of the Zenobia Awards, which I think it was originally submit for the Zenobia contest by Joe Kelly.
Yeah.
And then Cole Worley was kind of the person who helped shepherd Joe, and that was part of the intent of the contest, was to have games with underrepresented themes by underrepresented individuals. It didn't win the initial Zenobia Award, but that created the relationship that Cole Worley is ended up bringing this to Whirligig Games, and so it's a co-design by both of them. And based off of what you're telling me, it sounds like it's not so much that there's the opportunity for a hidden traitor, but almost like a prisoner's dilemma type of thing. Like someone could, if things are breaking bad, you could selfishly turn and then rat out your fellow gamers, hoping that you can still pull in some victory. Is that
so
what
the my main takeaway of it was, well, first of all, we didn't even get the opportunity to interact with that mechanic of the game, at least in the I've played it solo a couple times since then, but in that game, to even have the opportunity to snitch on a house, you have to the indictment has to go through, and then at the end of that round, you're allowed to place a token face down on one of the other houses that either is saying, hey, I'm loyal to this house, which will net you positive points at the end of the game if that house is still open, or I'm snitching on this house. I'm an informer for this house, and if this house is closed at the end of the game, I'll get more points. And it's a thing of, it definitely is a prisoner's dilemma where the tokens are placed upside down, or like they're placed face down.
Yeah.
So it's a bit hidden, but I feel like it's pretty infrequently, from what I would guess. Is that going to be like I have no clue whether or not that person is actually snitched? Like, it's going to be pretty clear. And there's an action you can take as one of your like few actions in the game to flip one of those face up. And there are consequences if you're caught being an informer. Once it is revealed that you are an informer, you then lose access to some aspects of the game. You like are not able to discard cards to the same pile that other people are. And it has like a little bit of a, once you don't want to be caught snitching, but at the same time, that is a way to win when you can tell that things are going to be shut down. I would be interested in playing it again now that I just feel like I would approach the game with that in mind. Like we didn't throw enough parties. And then we threw way too many parties.
That's something that really comes down to taste. I know a lot of people enjoy games that kind of have some sort of intuition to them when you start out. And I enjoy games where I can kind of see what are some of the things that I could do. And you don't have to rely on playing several times as learning games to finally figure out how the game wants you to play. That said, games that have that sort of latitude where you can kind of navigate that stuff and have weird outcomes, especially in the historical gaming context where you're still getting some sort of simulation of an experience. Like you're telling a story of what you as a community did and didn't do, and then you, upon realizing that you'd been ultra clandestine to cover your tracks and didn't get enough joy, slipped into straight hedonism and just went crazy into parties. That, in a way, is what that game's essentially supposed to do, is, you know, provide a simulation, historical context, and story. But when games have that sort of latitude, then they also tend to have like I don't know if it's necessarily a higher replay value, but you have more of a sandbox to play around in.
Yeah.
And kind of bend the system a little and see where you can take the game. SETI is another example of a game that I recently covered, and I have played more since, and I'm still kind of in this place where it's just such a big sandbox, and it's hard to really grasp like what's a good move that you can do in the game. And it is a competitive game that you're trying to win, but with more experience, I definitely am finding more about like how I want to navigate the game. Not necessarily like, yo, this is going to be a winning strategy, but I can steer it more in directions to rub up against the mechanical parameters in interesting ways, which I like. Another game that is kind of like that, I played, which is definitely the heaviest game that I've played in recent memory, is spelled this way that I'm texting you right now. And this is a word. I grew up reading fantasy books. And I learned how to read and understand words before I learned how to speak them. And this is one of those words where I was like too afraid to say it aloud for a long time because I was like, I'm not sure how I'm saying it is how I'm supposed to be saying it, including up until before recording this podcast when I Googled just to make sure that I was saying it right. What is this word, Eric?
Hegemony.
Well, according to Google, it's hegemony.
Hegemony?
Hegemony. So, listeners, let us know. But hegemony is a simulation board game where every player is playing as a different caste or class within a modern economic governmental system, hyper asymmetric when you think of like Root or something, where each faction has different objectives, different ways that they're going to score points. They have dramatically different capabilities. Sometimes there's overlap and intersection, sometimes not. But it is not a battling game whatsoever. It is very much like a simulation of government infrastructure and class infrastructure. I played as the working class, which
good as
was
you should.
Great.
Yeah, good.
Yes, but it was amazing that there were things that, on principle, I thought were good things for my class to do. For example, there's a bunch of governmental policies that you can put your political weight behind to hopefully get certain laws passed that change aspects of the game, particularly things that impact the between round production and cleanup and passive benefits, that kind of thing. A great example of this is immigration. I helped very early to pass a very, I guess, socially forward immigration policy that would let lots of immigration come in, because I was thinking, oh, great, this is going to give me a lot more workers for the working class. But quickly, I started realizing my level of workers was outpacing the number of companies that the upper class or capitalists and the middle class were able to put onto the board. And so I was having to find ways to employ my workers so they weren't just existing to be fed. And I was able to do that. But then as the game continued on, I started thinking outside of just the necessities of my own class. The state was starting to lose a lot of money because I had created so many social systems. Like, I was winning the game and did win the game, but it was very worrisome as I realized how much the state was having their coffers drained because of increased population, low health care, and these other things. And I was like, oh my God, is the government going to collapse? Which can be really bad because then like totalitarian fascism essentially comes in and resets all the political things. It was crazy and really, really great at demonstrating the intersections of all these things. Of course, the capitalists were horrifying, like rigging elections, like doing all kinds of like buying private islands. But nonetheless, the working class and the middle class were dependent upon them. The state had to fund certain things, and I had to be aware of how much they were paying their workers. And even though I wanted trade unions and for minimum wage to be incredibly high because that's going to benefit the prosperity of the working class, I could see how that was impacting the other elements around the board. It was bananas. It was our first game. It took us, including learning, though everyone had watched a video or read the rule book in advance. We played for like 4.5 hours.
Yeah, that checks out. The way you were describing it, it sounded like that was going to be a 4.5 hour game minimum.
Right. But it was a genuine blast. And the other players weren't necessarily like super heavy gamers, but they had a great time as well, which I think is a testament to like how good of a game it ended up being. And one of the things that I liked most about it is that the general cadence of the game is not the complexity. Like just playing a card and interacting with the game isn't the complexity. The complexity is the repercussions or how best to pivot the game into states that are going to be really beneficial for you. It is laborious to play, but it definitely was something that I really enjoyed, and more than I thought I would. Like, that looked like a game where I was going to be like, oh boy, this is going to be something where it's like, hey, yeah, it's kind of a slog, but no, I loved it.
Yeah,
I had a great time.
It sounds like such a unique experience. I don't think I've had a board game where the intersection of systems like that is applied to represent just society as a whole. And the fun part about it is you get to talk as if you were on MSNBC afterwards. Just going play by play of how everything worked.
It's horrifying as well. By being such a good simulation, you're also seeing yourself in real life in that situation and the horrors of what's happening. Of course, with all the political stuff going on right now, discussion of tariffs. Tariffs are a big part of that game. If the middle class and the capitalists make their resources that you depend on too expensive, then you can turn to foreign trade, which you can try and have the government have a trade policy that has limited tariffs. But the capitalists are, of course, wanting the tariffs to be super high so that you buy from the capitalists. Where the simulation breaks down a little bit is the assumption that the capitalists in real life would actually be able to produce the things that you want to buy that you can't buy from the foreign market because of tariffs. In this, ostensibly, the capitalists are able to provide you at affordable prices everything that needs to be manufactured, but I don't know if that's really how it works these days.
Yeah. I do love my heavy board games with a sense of existential dread. That is really nice to come out
it's
feeling
a good way,
just like panicked slightly.
Right. And I know I just talked hegemony for quite a bit there, but one other game that I played that I have to mention because it got brought up on last week's podcast. I got Forbidden Jungle. I know I said if people wanted, a message and, I might check it out or that kind of stuff. And then I thought about it after that and I was like, I'm going over to Alaska Robotics and seeing if they have a copy, even though no one mentioned it. We do have people who comment a lot and, interact with us, but no one specifically was like, Jack, I'm the guy who's requesting this. It all came from me, baby. Came from the heart. And I've played it 3 times so far. I've played it with my son and his friend. And I've played it a couple times with people at our Devil's Club Brewery meetup. And it's good. It's more complex, for sure, than Forbidden Desert or Forbidden Island. Maybe just a one notch of complexity above Forbidden Desert, several notches above Forbidden Island. I think it's more difficult, and there's a sort of abstraction away from the core concept that makes it more challenging. It has a lot of familiarity if you like that series. Forbidden Desert, I think, is still my favorite because it's so pure and it just balances the right level of complexity and streamlined simplicity and thematic immersion. This one has you interacting with the game in kind of bananas ways, where you're playing a shifting tile puzzle along with the classic Forbidden tropes, and you're having to deal with actual AI-driven enemies that are potentially going to harm you. These big squiddy spider things that look really cool but are terrible at standing up, and so that kind of adds to the fiddliness of the game. But I appreciate them nonetheless. My son had a great time with it. The other people that I played with had a great time. But you're unlike the other games where it is very clear, I need to flip tiles, I need to get my objective, and then that's going to be a win. In this, there's still the essence of trying to discover things and trying to keep up with the bad stuff that's happening on the board. But not only do you have to discover several different elements across the board, but then there's this manipulation of the board to get it arranged in such a way that you activate this portal, which will become your escape route, while also trying to make sure that you don't die in the process. Yeah. It's not as elegant as Forbidden Desert. So, like I said, I think that's still my favorite, but I'm still having a really good time with it, and I enjoy it, and I have them all in a line. Well, I guess not Forbidden Skies, but the other 3, the true tin box Forbidden games in a row, so that way my son and I can play start to finish.
Box.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's what's in the games department. A little bit more to talk about today, but now we can move on to...
You were talking about simulations earlier, and it just made me think of something, which is how do you take a board game from being this nice physical thing to a digital version of it, and kind of what are some of our favorites and what do we look for? Because we're talking about digital board games, digital adaptations of board games today.
Right. That's it. I did think about that transition earlier.
I was trying to. I thought about it.
I was on a run, and I should have started with Forbidden Jungle, because I did think about, this is the type of thing that makes me think of old simulation games, whether it's Sim Ant or,
SimCity
Dino Park Tycoon or... Yeah. And I was like, oh, perfect digital board games. But anyway... I digress. Digital adaptations of board games. And to be clear, what we're talking about here is the adaptations themselves. So like app-based games, or maybe you play them on your you play them on a console or on Steam, or it could be like Tabletop Simulator, Board Game Arena.
Yeah.
We're not talking about app integration in games.
Yeah.
So things like XCOM or the most recent Descent, or even additive apps like X-Haven for the Gloomhaven and Frosthaven series. We are specifically talking about where the game itself has been translated fully into a different digital medium.
Yeah.
So, what did you want to cover in this, Eric? Because you proposed this to me.
I did propose this. I think that there are like 3, in my mind, major bullet points of subtopics here, and I'm down to approach this in whatever order you think makes the most sense. What do we hope for when we see like a board game that we know and love is getting adapted? Like, what are the key things that we hope to see? What board games make the most sense to be adapted? And then finally, like a top 5 digital adaptations. I've played quite a few. I don't know about you, but I've played quite a few digital adaptations of board games between Board Game Arena or Steam or just apps on my phone. I had like a time where I was going to do a video ranking the best, which I probably still will do at some point or another. Add that one to my list as well of board games that I will, or videos I will do. But yeah,
I hope listeners are keeping track. You know,
yeah,
they're
thankfully,
like,
I'm
here's
hoping
one for
they
Eric.
because clearly I'm not.
Okay, so again, on this run that I did today, one thing that came to mind that I wanted to ask you relating to this topic, do you consider them board games or do you consider them video games first? Like, yes, they are a different beast, but for instance, if you're logging your plays of board games on Board Game Geek, would you log a play of a digital game?
I think it depends on the exact medium.
Okay.
So, for example, if I play a game on Board Game Arena, I absolutely will log that because that is I think very much just a true adaptation of that. I'm not gonna log my plays from like playing Gloomhaven on Steam. That because that, even though it is the mechanics are still there, the digitization of it just makes it such a different game in my mind. Like,
right.
I understand that same rules, same characters, same cards, everything from what I can tell in my limited time, not that limited time playing Gloomhaven digitally. It seems like everything is a pretty one-to-one adaptation. But it feels so much different to play Gloomhaven on the table versus on the computer.
Significant difference for sure, and it's something where it feels like if it were created in a vacuum, then it would fall into video game space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if you're playing Small World or Ticket to Ride, and someone had never heard of Ticket to Ride before, but they played the app for Ticket to Ride, they go like, oh yeah, this is a board game. Whereas Gloomhaven, if you took away the entire existence of Cephalofair as a company and you just had this release on Steam as a tactical turn-based strategy game, then people would be like, okay, so this is just in the same zone as an XCOM or something. And they wouldn't necessarily see it
as board game first.
As board game first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think
I can vibe with it.
For me, that would be how I would distribute it. And then I think on my phone, I don't think I'd log plays against the computer opponent. I just don't think that I would log plays against the computer opponent there. But at the same time, like if I play, well, but you can't you either play a solo mode or you play against another person on Board Game Arena. Whereas, like,
Right.
if I pull out the Ascension app, I'm playing against a computer intelligence model that is playing Ascension against me, which doesn't feel like a genuine play in the same way.
So
that, yeah.
then, if we're splitting hairs here, which is what a podcast
Yeah, totally.
exists
We're
to
here
do,
for it. We're here to split hairs, even though neither of us have any.
if I play, we got plenty of hairs. They're just on our chin instead of our head. If I play Regicide digitally, which there's not an official digital Regicide, but if I was playing
Yeah,
it,
if there was one.
then I could say this is me playing the board game or the card game Regicide. But Balatro doesn't have any pre-existing board or video game, though in theory it could.
It
know,
could.
like
It would take
and-
people are trying, Jack. Let me tell you, people are out there. The Reddit is filled with people being like, "I've figured it out. All you need is 10 binders full of spare playing cards with all of these adaptations on here, and now you can play Balatro in real life. It plays worse
Right.
than on the phone, but you can do it."
Yep. But you would still probably call Balatro a video game, right? You
think-
would maybe
yeah.
classify it in the genre of like, yeah, this is a poker type video game, but you wouldn't necessarily think of it as you're playing a board game just digitally. I don't know. Again, splitting hairs. But yeah, so, like you asked what are some things that you look for in an adaptation. So how about you? What are the things when you're first checking out, either you've picked it up just because you wanted to pick it up and see how it is, or that guide you before you even pick it up? What are you looking for?
I, for one, love a really good tutorial. I think Board Game Arena does a great job with that. I think Neko, Niancer, something like that. Whoever that person is has done so many tutorials on Board Game Arena that I have played through, which is helpful. One, if it's a game I haven't played before, or two, if it's a game I have played, but just to learn how to interact with the mechanisms digitally. Like, I played El Paso at the Asmodee showcase at PAX, and then playing it again digitally through Board Game Arena. Even though I had like a pretty good grasp of the rules, just having like a very clear, this is how it interacts, this is where you have to click to make the thing you want to happen, is first and foremost, that's the thing that will get me to play it continuously. Because I hate playing games where you're just like, yeah, you know the game already. Here's just go at it, and I get very confused very quickly.
Right.
So I think a good tutorial, hopefully a way to play it solo. Like if that's feasible for the game. Like I understand that I don't necessarily consider playing Ascension against the computer as like a true playthrough of it, but I'm really happy it's there, and I use that very frequently. So does my wife. Like we both get a lot of use out of it, just because it's, people play games on their phones all the time, even if there's not like a real opponent.
Right.
It's like you're scratching the itch of, I want to play this board game, but I don't necessarily want to like make it a thing where I have to pass my phone back and forth or wait for someone to respond digitally. Those are the two things that if a digital adaptation has, I'll absolutely give it a try and give it a fair shake.
Right. So when it comes to apps for me, or just straight simulations, which I guess we could say that Tabletop Simulator and Board Game Arena are attempting to be simulations of a board game playing experience. There's much less investment in like making a dedicated, beautiful animated app, and more just like, here is the raw board game, especially when it comes to Tabletop Simulator, which is trying to give you the physical aspect of playing a game and lifting components and that kind of stuff. But when I think of an app, what I'm really looking for is something that is going to either allow me to play solo on a game that I really love much more conveniently, or some other aspect that is going to streamline an aspect of a game. Even though I don't really mind the upkeep and the hand-holding of some games that are nice to have streamlined, but for the most part, I play board games because I like the physicality. I like tactile pieces. I want to pick up things. Rarely am I like, oh, this is just such a nightmare. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm almost never going to turn to an app to play a game that I otherwise wouldn't be playing. It's more something born out of a convenience. Some that come to mind for me are like Lords of Waterdeep or the Ticket to Ride app are great examples that are very popular, have been out for a while, and I could bang out a game of those very quickly. I could play solo in ways that those games aren't necessarily designed to play, and I can play them like on a plane when I'm not otherwise going to have Lords of Waterdeep in front of me.
Yeah.
So those are conveniences. If I'm just hanging out by myself at the house, rarely am I going to turn to a digital board game where I might otherwise play a solo board game, or I might just play a video game, like a fully fledged video game. I'm usually going to feel some sort of absence from the app itself, where it feels like a compromise to the true experience. But sometimes in the right setting, that really seems like the thing. One game in particular comes to mind that really feels like it embraced and capitalized on the essence of being an app, aside from Gloomhaven, which we should mention. Part of the reason why we wanted to talk about this is because Frosthaven just was announced as getting an
digital
app. A digital version. And then also Arcs is going to have a digital version. Well, Root is a game that has a brilliant app. The visual aesthetic is very gorgeous. Having a different medium and 3D models of the Kyle Farron illustrations is really so cool. And the game itself, Root is a temperamental game. It's a game like you were describing earlier with Molly House, where you kind of have to play it on its merits, otherwise you're not going to wring the most out of it. And I don't have to worry about that as much, and I can play it solo in ways that the upkeep of playing Root solo is much more difficult than a typical solo game, especially if you're going to have, a full complement of Automa in front of you. So that's the one game that comes to mind where I could play it solo, but it's so much more convenient that if I'm like, I have to play a Root and I don't have a full complement of players to play Root with, I'll turn to the app instead.
Yeah, and totally. And I feel like there are a handful of games where, and now I feel like is a good time to transition into, there are some aspects that I feel like make games very good when they are transitioned over, and then there are some aspects that I feel like make it kind of just meh. With some of those things being like, is it a really complex board game or like has a ton of upkeep is more what I should be saying. That means that you can get more actual active gaming time in while you play. That's a factor to consider. Like I I feel like playing Spirit Island on the table is such a different experience, and I think I prefer on the table to in the app. But I absolutely have times where I will play it on the app just because it is, you get through a game so much faster. And if I know I only have 30, 45 minutes to free, I'm not going to be able to get Spirit Island onto the table, played, and put away in 30 to 45 minutes. Unless something goes terribly wrong in the first few turns and I lose immediately, there's no way Spirit Island's coming out and then going away in 30 to 45 minutes. Whereas with an app, you could probably crank that out. And that's also why I think Gloomhaven is a pretty good adaptation. I mean, I think visually it does a lot of really cool things for the storytelling aspect of Gloomhaven, where it's, the characters are all fully colored. You're not just playing with cardboard or gray plastic pieces that you have to paint yourself. Siren. Loud siren.
Hey man, you're in the big city.
I'm in the big city.
I have to deal with Arrow outside. You have to deal with the sirens.
Okay, one of us gets a much cuter end of that stick.
I don't know. He's getting old and gangly. He's in his awkward teenager phase now.
Oh, bummer. Oh, his long, gangly, mini Australian Shepherd limbs.
Yeah, I guess he's still potato-shaped.
But I think games that give you that have those complexities that make it easy to shave time by them doing the upkeep for you.
Yeah,
that's a prime area for games to improve on in a digital adaptation. At the same time, I think some games are already so simple that it feels kind of silly to play it on your phone. I think with I'm trying to think. Splendor. I think I actually own that on Steam because I got it in a Humble Bundle. But there's no need to own Splendor. It takes longer, I feel to launch the app and get it going versus just having the game ready.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it depends on how simple. Ultimately, Splendor is kind of like one of those games where this could exist as an app. You could see it as one of those apps that you buy for $1 or $2, and it's just very simple, quick, easy to play, and you don't even have to think about it much. As far as the things that I think every app should have that definitely the industry should pivot towards, it already has, but now it should be seen as an automatic inclusion, that if it doesn't, I'm probably not going to buy that app. I think every app needs to have the ability to be played single player. Mm-hmm. This isn't talking about simulation. So, Tabletop Arena and Board Game Arena and Tabletop Simulator. I'm excluding them from this because that's such a different beast. But if it's a dedicated game or app, needs to have the opportunity for single player, needs to have a tutorial, it needs to have pass and play. Not just online play. If you have an app and I can't hand that off to someone to play, then you're doing something wrong. And then from there, I think it needs to be able to have some sort of animation or visual aesthetic that goes beyond simply here are PNGs of the board game components. And it can be the game itself, going back to Lords of Waterdeep, which is one of my favorites. The assets from that game are really beautiful, and the app does a fantastic job of giving you this overhead view. You can kind of tilt it in this isometric way. You can see little animations of the environment, little griffins flying by. But it also does some things that make conveniences out of how you pool resources, but you still see aspects of the game that evoke the fact that it's a board game. And I think that's really cool. So, like, if you're going to have a digital adaptation of your game, there should be elements to it that, just like with a board game itself, have beauty, that have grace and aesthetic and style.
Mm-hmm. Or just something else that gets added in on there. Like, I think voice acting can be really cool. Like, I played through the Eternal tutorial through the app. They have cool voice acting throughout there. That's like, oh, this is like a much different, like, this is a really cool different experience versus playing it in your just on the table. And I think that a visual, I don't think necessarily overhaul, but just either a good adaptation of the art style to whatever medium you're on, that's the most important. Mm-hmm. So like with Root, the style is indistinguishable from the physical board game. Like, you can tell that it's been adapted to be digital and it's a 3D model, but it is like, oh, this is still that same exact voice that we got from the art before.
Yeah, and even more so in some ways, because the board game uses the very cute and iconic meeples, mm-hmm. right? Like your Marquis de Cat, or I guess Marquise de Cat, is an orange meeple with little pointy ears that evokes the style and tone, but it's not a direct illustration of Kyle Ferrin's.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're playing the app of it, you are actually seeing your units as the illustrated versions that you see depicted in the cards and the box art. So in that way, it's much more additive compared to just the board game on the table, but in a way that, like you said, it is immediately recognizable as Root.
Yeah, I think that Root's just a great adaptation. We could talk about that one as like the whole, in my mind, that is maybe the best adaptation. I think it's definitely in my list of top 5.
Can I tell you another linguistic secret along the lines of hegemony and hegemony? I reviewed the Root app. It is one of the most viewed I think it's reviews on the channel. Possibly, yeah, it could possibly be at this point. But in that, I called it an adaptation, not an adaptation, an adaptation. And let me tell you, people very much want to point out when you use the wrong word. And so I think the text, the description of the video now just has adaptation. Got it. Now, anytime that I hear the word adaptation, I immediately think of that video. So this is all just kind of like in here, bro.
And I think it's not, you said it earlier, and then I said it under my breath. It's Marquita Cat, because it's a play on my kitty cat. Marquita Cat.
Yes.
But it's not Marquise de Cat. There's no E after the S, and it's French. Therefore, you don't pronounce the S. Right? Right? I'm not going crazy here, right?
Well,
that's like the whole
play. It is an E. But it is an E after it. It's Marquise.
Wait, what?
It is a play on, because the Margot in the root lore, internally at Leader Games, they refer to the cat, the leader of the cats, if you're buying the plushie, is Margot. And so it's a female, so they went with Marquise, which I believe I'm far distant from my French linguistic classes, but it's Marquise Day Cat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever noticed that E. Well, because I said it once and I was like, oh, it's like my kitty cat, Marquita cat. But no, you're absolutely right. There's an E in with French that E means that the S is pronounced. Well, my whole day is ruined now. So thanks for that, Jack.
Yeah, and again, without knowing how to say any words in the dumb fantasy stuff that I learned as a kid, Marquis and Marquise, I always pronounced it Marquise even without the E, because I ran into it in Final Fantasy Tactics as Marquis Elmdor, but I had no idea how French was pronounced when I got that game in like 1998. So I just said, there's an S at the end, Marquis Elmdor. And as part of Root, I learned how to pronounce Marquise versus Marquis. How about that?
I thought you were about to call French that dumb fantasy language.
Oh, yeah.
Because you said fantasy language, or the dumb fantasy language that you learned as a kid, and I was like, I think the French will be very upset.
J.R.R. Tolkien may have considered French a dumb fantasy language. He would have been like, no, this is not something that we're going to involve any of this post 1066 Norman, like bastardization of our sweet Anglo language here.
Saxons, just Anglo.
All Anglo, all the time. He was goated and sauced in the Anglo.
I think J.R.R. Tolkien was goated with the sauce. I do agree with that. Back to video or board games. I think that Root works really well as a board game. One, because the game, as a video, well, it also works well as a board game, but it works really well as a video game, or as a digital adaptation of it, because so much of the game has these like weird rule quirks that really give you a benefit by knowing all of them and being able to use them. And I think that the digital game of it, one, the art style carries it quite a far region, or quite a far distance, and the digital version of the game flourishes because you can just really play that game over and over digitally and undo moves and try to figure out what the best move would be. I find that helpful, especially like learning the game. I think I learned it through the app first. I played it physically first and then got swamped by people who knew what they were doing and then played it digitally and then got better. I'm still not good. But I think like because of how deep the strategy in that game goes, it's really helpful to have it digitally because I can play it on my own to like really kind of boost up my level of playing. And I think that games that have that deepness where, sinking time into the game will reward you. Whereas I feel like in some other games, the baseline level is just not that deep. So going back to using Splendor as an example, that game exists digitally. I think once you play it for an hour, you're maybe not totally as good as you will ever be. You're going to be pretty close though. And so it doesn't feel like you're improving as a player, which I feel like a digital game really, it's a boon to have that to have the ability to feel like when you're playing it on your phone or on the computer that you are growing or gaining skill.
Yeah. Are there any apps that you think are better than their board game counterpart?
Ooh.
Off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I think of the Arkham Horror dice game. Why is it escaping my head right now? I should really be prepared. I have it on my shelf, and then they made the X-Men version. Elder Sign. Elder Sign is, which is weird because I think that a game where you're rolling a lot of dice would be something that's best fit for a tabletop because dice are so tactile. But Elder Sign is kind of ugly, has not great components, has a weird flow to it. And for the level of game that it is, using kind of like a Yahtzee-ish mechanism, it has far more upkeep than it probably should. I like Elder Sign. I played a lot of Elder Sign. I think the Elder Sign app is better than Elder Sign, and it's easier to justify, especially like expansion content, to get to the rest of the Elder Sign verse. And it's a game that I really enjoy playing solo as an app that I wouldn't necessarily play as much physically. But again, that's, like something where I'm like on a plane and I want to play a bunch of Elder Sign, or, like I'm on a bus, or I'm in a position where I don't have access to playing some other game in physical form. But I do think that that's an example of a game where the illustrations, the UI, everything just makes it a better experience than what Elder Sign really could be. I think Elder Sign, if a second edition came out, could be the best of the Arkham series, but it's so dated at this point, and even when it came out, it felt like a lot of the production was an afterthought compared to the flagship titles that Fantasy Flight was putting out. But can you think of any apps where you think like it's a wholesale improvement over the original?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me at least, Ascension is it just flows so much faster on the app, where it's the gameplay goes quicker, which I think benefits it, because on your turn there are fewer choices that really matter. So most of the time it's just play all the cards. All right, what do I want to buy based on what's available? What monsters do I want to kill based on what's available? And because of the app, you can just say, okay, cool, I have played all these things. This is how much kill power I have. This is how much... Like, it just automates the math out of the game, but just boils it down to, these are the choices you're making. And Ascension already doesn't... Like, the art style is weird. Sometimes it's really cool. Sometimes it's really like, what is that? What am I looking at right now? What is this
Listen,
thing?
this is 15 years ago.
It is.
But that Ancient Land Tyrant is a sick illustration. That's all I can tell you.
I think that game, especially, you're not really paying attention to the art anyways, and I feel like the adaptation does a good job of getting the general vibe of the game while not overwhelming it with, oh, we're gonna make the art super prominent and have it be a very we're staying true to the style, because first of all, the style isn't great. So it's kind of nice that it is it's a really honest adaptation. So it is very much just, this is the exact game you're playing on the table, and we've made it into an app, and we've automated all of the like very slow parts of the game that make this game take longer than 5 minutes.
I think that one thing that we need to do, so this is like a commitment to the audience right now, is do an interview with someone who's in the digital gaming space, because I'd be really interested to talk to someone about like what the business decisions are involved. I mean, at this point, in the backlog of the Cardboard Herald, if you're listening to this as a podcast and you go back through the history, then you'll find interviews with tons of publishers and designers, some of which I talk about digital adaptations, but I have never on this channel had any guest where it was someone from Direwolf Digital or from Playdeck to talk about the development of these things, the business decisions that go into these things, the licensing issues that go into these things. I did do an interview with Kyle Farron where we talked about the translating more than anything his illustrations into a digital form by someone else. Like clearly these are meant to evoke the illustrations that he had, but coming up with 3D models that are slightly askew, by different artists who are bringing it into a different medium, what that process is like, how much say he has, that kind of stuff. But I think talking to someone who actually makes these adaptations would be a really cool thing. So that's my commitment is, like the next interview that we hunt down to put on this feed will be someone in this space. We do have some other interviews that we need to do. So it might not be the next interview.
It might not be the next one posted, but it'll be the next one in the works.
The next one that we seek out and schedule.
Yeah, totally.
But if someone, speaking of interacting with the channel and the channel itself, if someone were to have comments, say, on this episode or comments on the topic itself, at youtube.com, the Cardboard Herald / the Cardboard Herald, or on our website, cardboardherald.com, and shooting an email over to us using the form there, they could let us know their thoughts on this stuff, which brings us forcefully, by my way of just shepherding this at this point, because I was rambling so much, into some comments. Some people had some thoughts about digital board games when we put out a call for thoughts and feedback and comments and questions. What did they have to say, Eric?
Yeah, so we got a comment from David-HZ90 or 90N, saying that he is currently he worked on the adaptation of Bullet, which was a series of games from 99 Up Games, I think is the name of that developer. Let me just confirm that versus just saying it and then being wrong. 99 Up Games. They're 99 Up Games. Nope, not 99 Up Games. That's a different gaming company. Hold on, I had it pulled up. I was ready. I was prepared. Level 99 Games. Level 99
Level
games.
99.
They're the ones who did, they've adapted Dead by Daylight. They've adapted,
99 Heroes.
99 Heroes.
Bullet,
so those are games
Argent.
those are the adaptations of other things into board games. And then they have a board game called Bullet that is a shoot 'em up puzzle action game. And this commenter, David H9ZON, worked on the adaptation of that into a game on Steam, which he does note is available right now. But he basically, his comment is, in the adaptation, we actually changed the original rules of the board game to really adapt Bullet to the video game format, but we also ended up adding the classic rules. And I think having not played Bullet, that's a super reasonable thing to do. I think that's actually really nice to be like, to acknowledge that this is a different media format that you're playing. We're still going to give you the option to play it the way you always have, but this way is going to be a better experience overall.
And that's part of being an adaptation versus a simulation, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a literal sense, it is nice to have, like that literal translation. This is exactly what you would play just in a digital format. So it's just UI and visual changes. But that also is a waste to not have the ability to or to not take advantage of the new format. Bringing it back to Root, that's a great example, but many board game adaptations have different modes that you can play, different levers, particularly for solo play, that you can mess around with, achievements, challenge modes. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do in that space, though as a preservationist, I always want the ability to play as intended. Like, if you tell me this is not inspired by a board game, but this is an adaptation of this board game, I would have the expectation that I could play the game under the classic rules. So, yeah, I think having both in that instance would be a good way to go.
Yeah.
Though, if you say it's inspired by, then, we got some leeway.
We got some leeway there. But I think that, like, you are playing the game through a different format. And I think that it's fun. I'm assuming it's fun as a developer to, like, figure out the cool ways to do that. And I mean, I think that I'd be interested in chatting with a person who does this about, like, the good parts of it. So yeah, this will be good. This will be good whenever we get that interview scheduled. We got plenty of questions coming down the way of whoever we end up interviewing. But yeah, I think, like, using...
Well, it sounds like we're already starting to make some contacts here.
Maybe. We're possibly. He's a fan of the channel, it says. But I just think that it is... It's fun also for people who have played the game a ton already to see the new adaptation, like, see different ways to interact with the game. Or, like, with Gloomhaven, if you've played through the campaign already and you've played fully, you're done with the game. You've played the board game from A to B, you finished the campaign. The Gloomhaven app gives you tools to make your own maps and to play other people's maps. And I think that just gives you so much more content that you're like, I love this system. I've already gone through the story, and I could go back and play through the story again, and I think that's totally reasonable because, especially with Gloomhaven, the digital changes are interesting. The like visual style they have is really cool, and it does, in my mind, play much differently, even if it's the same game. But using this new medium that you are in to your full advantage, I think it's cool to see some of those things where you are, like, you can play Gloomhaven and you can also play all these new scenarios. You can also have Ticket to Ride, where it's just the same game, and that's that. Mm-hmm. And that is totally fine, other than the fact that it gets really upset at you when you don't have internet connection to play solo.
Yeah.
That's making the worst of the new medium.
So what about this next comment here?
The next one is from Blue Sec Pearl, frequent commenter here, who says, mobile apps for games are a blessing for metro commutes. I love how the digital implementation can streamline all systems. That said, I love being able to hold physical bits. It is not as satisfying to cast down into the briny deep digitally. but I appreciate the option. And totally, I think that there are so many games where the tactile feel, losing that hurts way more than the convenience of playing the game. Even if it's faster. So like with kind of like what I said earlier with Spirit Island, playing it digitally, I'm not going to necessarily get as much fun out of playing it digitally. At the same time, that's like a thing where, in similar to like having it for commutes, I had to have it for a like very extended stay at a place where I could not have brought the game.
Right.
And it is a blessing to be like, oh, I really want to play a game, a board game, but I don't really have the time or space to play it at the moment. But if you're on the metro going somewhere, it's really helpful to have. But I kind of agree, and we had a whole podcast about board game components and our favorite ones. And clearly board game components are like a big part of the game. It's how it's your medium with interacting with the game. And you lose that.
You know, the specific wording here, mobile apps games are a blessing for metro commutes. That kind of blessing makes me think of like, you know, what problems does it solve? And I realized that we didn't talk about two things that I had thought about earlier. But this is very astute as a comment. But playing with friends at a distance, that is the instance in which I would play a digital board game gladly, even over playing what is primarily a video game or playing a board game. I live in a small, isolated town in Alaska, and many of my friends, in fact, most of my friends that I've made over the years, are in different communities. I have close friends in Arizona, in DC, in Ohio, in Anchorage, Alaska. I do have a lot of people that I can play physical board games with here, but there are people that I love and care about that I can't play board games with them conveniently, except through things like Board Game Arena, Tabletop Simulator, Magic online, like playing through Magic Arena. That's something I do with my brother now and then. Those are great ways that you can still have a tabletop gaming experience with people. And this is a blessing, you know, like Magic is something that I bonded with my brother on at a very young age. And, you know, like we're not going to play with weird camera setups where we could see each other's play space and everything like that. That's one, that's a lot of work. And two, I know my brother, he's just never going to do that. But I can play Magic Arena with him. I can do a booster draft with him. There's all kinds of things that I could do. And then, you know, like you and I playing a game together to talk about a podcast. You know, we played King of Tokyo Duel.
Yeah.
And that was great as a way that you and I are managing a podcast in the channel together, but we don't have the ability to play physical games together. Yeah. So at this point, unless we have two copies of a game, we don't always have context of the same game, you know?
In fact, usually we
going
don't.
To,
because usually you get a copy of the game or I get the copy of the game, and we don't.
Right.
That guy,
and so like Molly House, for example, we signed up for a review copy of that, and that's the copy that you have because it seemed like it would be a good fit and something that you could get to the table, and it worked for our schedules and everything. But now I'm going to have to try and find a copy of Molly House either to purchase or just to play, so that way I have the context that when it comes to like Game of the Year or something, I'm still up to date. Having things like Board Game Arena, Tabletop Simulator are fantastic for that. The other thing that I thought about that should have immediately come to mind, is from a game design point of view. Tabletop Simulator revolutionized game design in a way that I think no one would have thought about, especially pre-COVID, because there was an initial sense of like Tabletop Simulator being a tool that could be used for game design and development, making essentially a demo of your game. But when COVID happened, entire studios switched to just entirely digital design work, so that way they could immediately do these iterative changes on the fly and have some sort of physical essence that they could work with and manipulate with. And that's what Tabletop Simulator is so cool about, is you don't have to be a programmer to really design within that space. It gives you so much latitude because ultimately you are just moving around a bunch of JPEGs. Kind of what I said shouldn't be how board game apps are developed, but in this simulation space, I think it has allowed access to people to try games and understand games at a much earlier stage, get involved in the development process and be play testers, and then just is a fantastic tool for designers where they don't have to make so many copies of a game and then distribute it just to get playtest feedback. They can get much more real-time feedback from a broader audience by having it in this digital form without a huge investment.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like it makes it so much easier to play a wider variety of games that you're somewhat interested in and you are down to try. And I've bought games off of, I've played them digitally and been like, oh, I really like the game, I want to own it physically. And that's a thing that I just would not be possible without all of the massive amount of digital adaptations that are either on Board Game Arena or Tabletop Simulator has like every game imaginable at this point, which is fun. Other people also have to have Tabletop Simulator, but that's like a one-time $10 purchase to every board game ever. You now have access to. You're welcome.
Yep.
And you're totally right. That changed board game design. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say there is a kitschy charm to how like lo-fi Tabletop Simulator is. It reminds me of like the Windows 98 pool game that I used to play as a kid. It has definitely an aesthetic that at this point, if they made it a lot more polished, I would kind of miss some of the just like lo-fi.
Can we keep lo-fi? Can we keep the lo-fi Tabletop Simulator? I know you just spent a lot of money upgrading the graphics, but like, could we just keep the low graphics? That'd be great. I do also love the low graphics. I also love the table flipping. I'm glad that that's a thing you can do. Or flicking.
Yeah.
Like I love that there's a flick interaction on Tabletop Simulator. I wonder, I haven't seen it.
Are you thinking dexterity games?
Yeah, I'm thinking like Flick 'em Up or like the penguin
Catacombs
one.
Or Ice Cool.
Ice Cool.
Right.
I wonder if there's an Ice Cool Tabletop Simulator. I feel like that one's much tougher because it is like you're playing with the wonky physics, whereas Flick 'em Up, I think you're just like, Flick 'em Up maybe you could adapt. I'll have to look into it.
Right.
But yeah, Tabletop Simulator gives so much leeway in terms of what you can do with a digital adaptation and how quickly you can access those. But I think like a true dedicated app is always really nice. Even with Board Game Arena and Tabletop Simulator, having an app is really nice. Especially just because like vaguely going back to the original comment from Blue Sec Pearl, if you're in like a rapidly changing environment, you might lose Wi-Fi, you might lose your internet connection entirely, you might go into a very deep tunnel, and being able to play the game on your phone that you already have and downloaded and everything like that, is super helpful to have around. And I think that cannot be understated how many board games get played on the train. And not Ticket to Ride, because once you go into a tunnel, you're not allowed to play Ticket to Ride anymore because you lose internet connection.
One last story before we sign off. My wife loves Lords of Waterdeep. It is her absolute favorite game. She's down to play pretty much everything else, but there's something that's like a visceral connection there, which is funny because she is not a D&D player or anything, but she loves that, and that was her in for the Honor Among Thieves movie. Anyway, she loves playing as the building person in Lords of Waterdeep, who benefits from having many buildings out there, which, if we were playing the board game on the table, she's going to be fine with whatever's dealt to her. But if she's in a mood and she's playing the app game, she will reset the game over and over again until she gets to play as the building person, and then just crank up the difficulty as much as possible. And
I think that one thing that is important to comment on, and it's a whole factor of that, which that's hilarious, by the way.
Yeah.
You don't get any fun leeway in digital adaptations. You can't just say like, okay, can I be the builder guy? You can't do that. One thing that I have really enjoyed is that on Board Game Arena, there's an option to home rule my home rule of, and by my home rule I mean everybody's home rule, of taking out the crows and ravens from in Wingspan. There's enough people that they made that like an official option that they could just say, yep, take them out. We don't want them. Get them out of here.
You guys just aren't powerful enough to hang,
They're just become so central to whatever game they end up showing up in. But I think
you have to counter them.
Okay, in the game where you're mainly playing solitaire, you have to counter the ravens.
Yeah. I won't teach you the secret technique because,
Is the secret technique a gun?
Yes.
Just shoot the ravens.
Yes, it is. The secret technique is removing them from the game.
Yeah, weird.
Well,
I'll sign off with my top 5 board game adaptations. The ones that I play with some regularity. Which would be Gloomhaven. I play with some regularity the Steam version where it's like a full. It feels like I'm playing a video game, even though I am just playing like rule for rule Gloomhaven. I enjoy having Spirit Island. I know it's not the same. It is definitely a step down in like the amount of fun I get per game, but it is a really good adaptation. And it's a game that I think really benefits from being able to just sink hours into, and it makes me. I am able to play Spirit Island on the go, or if I'm like on the train, like I could probably get a game of Spirit Island in. And I think that's a little bit because I just love the game so much. It's an app that I play a lot. I put quite a bit of time into Star Realms. Star Realms is a really good adaptation. That app is really good. I've been enjoying Root, obviously we've mentioned, and then the last one that I wanted to just mention as this is a really good adaptation of this game is Dune Imperium does a really good job of giving me the Dune Imperium experience.
Got to get that Jason Momoa.
I know.
We talked about it last time.
Jason Momoa, Timothée Chalamet. Get both.
Zendaya for the hat trick.
Exactly. And I think that's an adaptation that came out recently, I think like last year, and was super helpful to just be able to go, I have 30 minutes. I can fit in Dune Imperium.
Okay, well, I didn't prepare for this, but let's see if I can just bust this out off the top of my head and then immediately regret as soon as we get off this podcast not mentioning something else. But Elder Sign, already mentioned that. Small World, fantastic app, and gives me access to the millions of Small World expansion races and factions that I don't have to manage. I love Root. That's a fabulous app and invaluable as someone who doesn't always have a Root crew. The Lords of Waterdeep, I think I have to say, because of my wife, and I love her very much, and it's one of the apps that we play the most. Mm-hmm. Like, that is tradition that we play that on a plane. And then outside of that, I would say that my favorite adaptation, maybe Concordia. Concordia has a really good app, and also I really like Concordia, and it does a really good job of taking what is kind of a sprawling game and making it sensible, and it has a pretty good tutorial in it as well.
Rad. This is a non sequitur, but I thought of it, and then I realized that we're probably I don't think I'll find myself in the position to talk about it again. I like the Wingspan app to play solo, but it is such a bad game to do pass and play with, because there are so many things where it's like, oh, I'm gonna lay an egg here. Oh, okay, I have to pass the phone to everybody to make one small choice so that they can pass the phone to somebody else to be like, what bird are we going to lay an egg on? Because I have everybody else gets to lay an egg on a bird. And so the game just plays so much slower than just at the table. And it is, if you're playing like just against the computer, totally fine. Totally reasonable thing. That game is terrible to play online for that reason, because it's like, oh, I was kind of in the middle of my turn and I just sent my move off because I have to wait until they respond so that I can continue doing the other 4 things on my birds. But then once it comes back to me, those are all kind of just automated, and so now I just have to wait to then say, okay, now my turn is done, and back to you.
Love it.
Don't do that.
Well,
don't do that.
As far as how the audience can help support us with questions, with comments, we want to hear all about your favorite board game adaptations into app-based games, digital games. I want to hear about those squishy, soft, lovely stories about how they were a blessing in your life. You know, like, tell me about the friend who you got to play this with, or the family, or, you know, the connections, how these things helped you. Or if you're a designer, tell us about how it actually impacted your design work. Yeah. And did Tabletop Simulator give you an avenue to pursue this in a way that you wouldn't have in the past? And especially if you are someone who's in the industry who makes digital adaptations of games, get in touch. We want to talk. Maybe we can co-host a podcast or do a dedicated interview. And lastly, just as a thought, but, you know, there's a million topics that we could talk about. We would love just general audience questions about whatever topics you think would be good. But it just occurred to me, there are a lot of digital adaptations of board games, but there's also a lot of board game adaptations of digital games, which is a whole other
really
avenue.
That'll be really fun flip for us to do next week.
Yeah. All right. Well, get in touch with us at Cardboard Herald. All the stuff. You know it.
cardboardherald@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube at The Cardboard Herald. Find us on Spotify at The Cardboard Herald. We also have a website, which is cardboardherald.com. Check it out. We have a form on there that you can fill out and let us know. I'm now looking at the camera. You can comment on any of those places or send an email. We would love to
Right.
hear from you. Tell us what your favorites are. We probably didn't talk about quite a few board games that have been adapted. That might be because we haven't played them. So comment below so that we maybe take a look at them and add them to our favorites. Thank you so much for tuning in and being an awesome community. I am Eric, joined by Jack with the Cardboard Herald.
Bye.